Alright, welcome to another video here. Today we're doing something a little different from the normal gameplay videos. We'll be looking at and talking about legacy and vintage format panel, and what benefit that could give us, as well as my idea for an eternal format watchdog that I think could help solve some of the problems and concerns I've been hearing and seeing online from people about adding these two panels, some responsibilities there. I'd really love to hear who you would like to see on a future legacy or vintage format panel down below. I think I'll be giving a couple thoughts as well. But first, we're going to take a look at a Reddit article that kind of kicked this off for me. So 2 weeks ago now, there was right after the big inaction ban announcement of the end of June, where nothing was hit in legacy, nothing was hit in vintage. There was a lot of outcries on Twitter, including I think Brian Cook asking for a format panel, other people talking about them, people were unhappy. If you missed it, if you're watching this video, you probably didn't, but nothing was hit in Oops All Spells, and a lot of that, people really wanted that. Nothing was hit in Reanimator, even though that's still the top deck in the format, and has been so in the best deck for years, in spite of bans to Frog and Grief and Troll. So people weren't happy about that. And I think it echoed some of the things we've seen in Pauper, and this article or post on Reddit kind of went through it. So in general, the panel for Pauper is well liked. It is, generally considered a good thing. But it's got some issues. They talk about Monastery Swiftspear remaining legal for way too long. Bans and then reverting there for Expedition map, which can be jarring, especially to players who aren't super invested all the time. And they talk about the money here too. Pauper is a pretty cheap format. You do a ban or something like that in Legacy or Vintage and you undo it, you're going to get a lot of unhappy people. Or really even any changes in Legacy and Vintage can get people upset because people do have a lot of money invested in these formats. And there's got a lot of discussion here, so you can take a look at that yourself later if you want. But that's kind of what was kicking us off here. Format panels have been pretty controversial with, a lot of the, content creators saying, largely being outspoken against them in the legacy and vintage spaces. But I think after the latest set of, inaction here, where people are starting to come around to it, especially in legacy. So what's my idea here? The idea... Let's make this big first. The idea is to set up an eternal format panel watchdog that will oversee the vintage format panel, the legacy format panel, and the Pauper panel. And this person or persons will have a few different responsibilities. Number one, prevent inaction from panels. So you see on the Pauper panel, there was the big example of Monastery Swiftspear being left alone for too long. In today's Legacy, something from Reanimate is probably overdue just because of how strong it's been, and it's just not going away. It does still need to get taken down a peg, I think, by most people's standards, or at least there needs to be, continued discussion about that. Oops, another one to be looking at, and again, I think this one's a bit more controversial because Oops isn't even that good of a deck. But as far as the play patterns and if it's fun go, people are, getting tired of it. Another thing is to administer competency tests. Now, part of being on one of these format panels is that you have to understand the format. And part of the watchdog's role, in my view, would be to give tests in order to make sure that the people on the panel understand the format. So question. If your opponent is on Oops and you give them a situation and you say, your opponent's got Fairy Macabre and how do you play around it? Or, your opponent goes for Entomb the end of your turn and they're on the top deck at the moment, Reanimator. Are they more likely to get Atraxa or Inkwell Leviathan, just to make sure people are on top of things here. And then we also want people on this format panel watchdog to curb knee-jerk reactions. So this would be things like people wanted Nadu banned during one of the last ban cycles, and it just is not really even a deck anymore right now. Oops is one that may or may not fall into this category. People don't like Oops, but it's not one of the better decks in the format. So I think, there's a lot of ground here to kind of mention things that where cards have been called out as needing to be banned, but just by letting the format adapt for a little bit, it's actually been okay. Now, next would be, how do people get onto these format panels, and how does someone become an eternal format panel watchdog, right? So it's a pretty big responsibility. Already being on this panels is, important, but if you're going to be part of the panel watchdog and you're going to be kind of in charge of, safeguarding the format by making sure that people on the vintage format panel and the legacy format panel, pauper panel, etc. are, doing what they need to do to keep these formats fun. It's a big responsibility, right? I think the key thing here is I don't want people on any of these panels or in the watchdog role to actually want it. I think that's really key. Content creators are going to be the people, or aspiring content creators, going to be the ones who are going to want this the most, right? It's kind of like being a politician, where it's a role, being a content creator, you get, literal, you get money, and you can increase your, channel and whatnot just by having visibility. I don't think that's actually good for any of our formats here. I think I want people on this panel who don't even want to be on the panel in the first place. I think it should honestly be closer to a punishment. I do want people that know what they're doing, though. So I think, I'm not sure exactly how to swing this, but you need to somehow get to a point where you've got people on the panel for a period of time who are making decisions, who are aware of the format and are looking in the best, have the best interest of the format at heart, and in making it more interesting and more fun. But at the same time, are not really trying to sell themselves. They're just trying to fix the format. So I think it's, I'm not sure exactly how you swing that. I think it's hard to force people, unless you can, threaten to suspend their Magic Online account or something if they don't participate in the panel. It's a little hard to force people on here, but maybe there's some sort of an incentive to get people that aren't, really looking for the limelight in order to get on the panel. Maybe while you're on a format panel, you get a Magic Online God account where you can play with all the cards. Same thing with the format watchdog. I think that kind of thing would be a good incentive. Just a little something for people to, if they're chosen to take part in this, but not have an incentive that's not just increasing their own fame. I want it to be also rotating. I know death threats are something that gets called out upon when people talk about panels, including the Pauper one. I don't think you would want anybody on this panel for too long. I think, that's just probably toxic. And I also don't want a lot of grinders. I think maybe one grinder per panel is okay. And what I mean by that is someone that's playing, 4, 5, 6, almost or every day, on Magic Online for the most part. That's just such a niche part of the community. I don't think that's really where we want to be. I think we want like one grinder to show, that cover that demographic. It is an important demographic, don't get me wrong, but your average legacy vintage player, the formats that I'm involved with, you're playing sparingly. I want the format to be curated around someone who's playing sparingly. Who's aware of the format, watches some content, plays, I would say monthly, or, at least every 2 months. To me, that's kind of your typical legacy or vintage player, is playing like occasionally. Then on the other end, you've got the grinders, and you've got the people that play like once or twice a year or just watch content. But I do think you want this focused on the people who are playing, but just, the majority of people who are playing who are doing so sparingly. So well, I think one idea to get people on the panel was to have, I forgot where I was going with that one. Anywho, I think that's basically it. As far as who I want on the panel, is basically just not content creators. I want people who play the format somewhat, who are active in the community but are not looking for fame. I don't really have any names. It's kind of a general idea right now. So that's about it for me. I think the format panels overall are a good idea. I would like to have a legacy and a vintage format panel. I think they'd both be really good for the formats. I think having the Watchdog element to it, whether that's one person or 2 or 3 people, I'm not sure. Let me know your thoughts down below. But just a group to kind of oversee and make sure that things are happening when they should be, and when they're not, people are taking action, and just making sure everyone who's on the panel is fit to be there as well. Alright, anyway, that's it for me. If you got any ideas for who you'd like on the panel, let me know down below. Be very curious to see who would come up, and see you next time for more, mostly right now, vintage gameplay videos.